Hello everybody, it's Bob Ryder for NWA TNA. You're listening to the interactive interview with James Walsh and Dan Edler.
Interactive Wrestling Radio.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is James Walsh, joined as always by Daniel Edler with the interactive interview.
Today we're joined by Bob Ryder from NWA and WCW fame, also the owner of OneWrestling.com. We've got many questions for you today, Bob, so how are you doing?
Doing great. How are you guys doing?
We're great, thanks. Excellent. We've got many questions, questions emailed in by fans and some from myself, so...
Dan, you've got quite the southern accent.
Just start from the very beginning. So when you were a child, were you a wrestling fan?
Yeah, I grew up in the South in Louisiana and had a chance to watch kind of 2 or 3 different regions. We had, early on, we had Dixie Wrestling that had people like Don Carson, Ken Lucas, Bobby and Lee Fields, those kind of guys. Dusty Rhodes came through with Dick Murdoch. We also had Leroy McGurk, who was promoting Oklahoma, Louisiana, Texas, Mississippi, that general area. Bill Watts took over that promotion and turned it into the Mid-South. So I saw a lot of wrestling in the 60s and 70s. Of course, back then, the only way to really follow wrestling outside of your own area, because there was no cable and no internet, was the wrestling magazines. So I grew up on Wrestling Review, the early wrestling magazines that that really told the story and gave you a look at what the stars were doing in other areas. And the funny thing is, back then, we'd have a guy that was in our territory that might get hurt or something, and we wouldn't see him for 6 months. The magazines would tell you where he was. He'd be in Florida or in New York or California. Those were some different days, and in a lot of ways I miss those days because wrestling was a whole lot more fun. The crowds were a lot different, and of course most of the people in the crowds then believed what was happening was on the up and up, so to speak. So we've come a long way, and it's been quite an evolution.
Who were your favourites when you were growing up? I mean, you mentioned that there was lots of different territories, so who were your favourites from each territory? I
guess my favorite when I was first breaking in as a wrestling fan back as a kid was Sputnik Monroe. And he's an old-timer that a lot of the fans in the South remember. He would travel all around the South, pretty major star in Memphis in particular. But he was actually married at one time to the promoter in the town where I grew up. So he would come back to town every now and then and would come and headline, and he was just a great heel. He was the kind of guy that was hated everywhere but in our hometown, and everybody loved him there because he was local. Of course, I was very fond of the NWA in those days. People like Jack Briscoe and Dory Funk Jr. and Danny Hodge was a great junior heavyweight in our area. Bill Watts as a wrestler, Dick Murdoch. Those guys were just incredible, and always enjoyed that kind of a wrestler. The Dick Murdochs were almost larger than life. I mean, he was a guy that I'm sure people have similar experiences with different wrestlers, but when he would come in, it would seem like something was special because he was on the show. And of course, the NWA champions, as they would come and go, they would always come in, and it'd be a big deal when the NWA champion would come to your town. They would raise the ticket prices to championship prices for that event. So it was really like something special was happening. It wasn't your average wrestling event when the champion was on the show. Liked a lot of the junior heavyweights in our area. Ken Mantell was one of my favorites. And then the later days, certainly Ric Flair. I mean, who could list their favorites without listing Ric Flair? And it's been so much fun getting to know people that I have in the past few years working with WCW and now in NWA TNA, because Ric Flair was always my favorite. And to be able to meet him and to call him a friend has been just an incredible experience.
You mentioned working with TNA and WCW, but at which point did you become more than just a fan and get involved more actively?
Well, I had, I'm still a fan, and you have to be a fan to be involved, or you're in the wrong business. But I had been a fan for years. Went through college, got out, and went into business for myself, and have had and still have a successful travel business in Louisiana. I had back in 1994, I believe it was, signed on to Prodigy, which at the time was kind of one of the first internet services that gave people a chance to get on the internet and communicate with other people. And I signed on to Prodigy just because of the travel potential there and to take advantage of some of the things that might be coming in the world of travel. At the time, I ended up being appointed to be one of the travel experts for Prodigy, and we would basically answer questions and talk to people that had questions about airfare or cruises or anything like that. And at some point, I discovered there was a very small area of Prodigy, kind of a subdivision of one of the sports bulletin boards, where there was a group of wrestling fans talking about their favorite wrestling events and their memories of the good old days. And it was a great group of people, and I got actively involved in communicating with those people. And at some point shortly after that, there was a situation that came open where they needed some help running that area. And I volunteered and took over the Prodigy wrestling area, and certainly very quickly moved out of the subclass of a subclass of a subclass and got its own area, and became probably the most popular division of Prodigy for several years. It opened up some doors. I was able to do some things with the WWF. Back in 1995, WCW certainly got very interested in communicating with fans on the internet, and just one thing led to another, and before you knew it, I was going to all the ECW shows in Philadelphia, covering their shows for Prodigy. I was interviewing most of the people at WCW, and Eric got to know Eric Bischoff quite well. He had brought me on board to do some things with the internet with WCW, and it turned into something that became kind of a full-time situation. I was helping out quite a bit behind the scenes, consulting at WCW, but also, along with Jeremy Borash, we co-hosted WCW Live, which was just an incredible experience. We were talking to people every night from all over the world. We had listeners from Australia, New Zealand, England, you name it. We had people that would call in from all over the world. So that's really when I broke in as far as kind of stepping on the other side of the curtain. Probably 1995 when I started doing the stuff with Prodigy and WWF and WCW.
Is Prodigy how you eventually created OneWrestling.com?
Well, that's kind of interesting because Prodigy, as I said, the wrestling area was the most popular part of Prodigy. It created an incredible amount of revenue for them at the time when you had to pay per hour to be able to access Prodigy. And as things evolved and they went to an unlimited access charge, it started to kind of get to the point where they were looking for other ways to create revenue. And my suggestion to Prodigy was that they create a subdivision of the Prodigy area that would be strictly for wrestling, and they would open it up to people that weren't normally Prodigy users that might want to be able to come on and take part in the chats that we were doing with WCW and things like that. And my suggestion was that they charge a limited amount of money to access for a month, maybe $1, maybe $2. And at the same time, they'd be able to sample what you could do in other areas of Prodigy. It was approved 2 or 3 times. They were going to do it. They kept on changing their minds. And Prodigy at the time, as some of your listeners may know, was going through an awful lot of changes in management and philosophy. And that's one of the reasons that they never could really catch up with AOL. AOL was progressive and took chances, and Prodigy, for whatever reason, never could get their act together. So after waiting for about a year for them to do something, I approached them and said, look, I believe there's something out there that the internet is looking for, and that we can bring them. If you guys don't want to do it, I'm going to do it. So in 1997, I think it was August or early September, went ahead and launched OneWrestling.com, and it very quickly became one of the most popular websites on the internet.
Excellent. How did the original wrestling radio show begin?
Wrestling radio was one that Jeremy Borash was running up in Minneapolis, and he approached me. I didn't know who he was, had never met him, never heard of him. He approached me to do the show, and at the time I was involved traveling quite a bit with WCW, and I said, well, I really don't have time, but I can put Dave Scherer on the show, who is the guy running One Wrestling for me. Mm-hmm. And Dave went on the show, had a great time, ended up being asked to be a regular co-host along with Jeremy and Nick Harsh. And so Dave was doing the show, and then along a couple of months later, I did meet Jeremy and hit it off immediately and recognized that he was very talented, and the show was a very professionally run show. They invited me to come on, and those were some of the most fun shows that I was ever involved in. The chemistry between Dave and Nick and Jeremy and myself, I think it worked. It was a lot of fun, and anybody that listened to those shows, I think, would tend to agree it was pretty special.
Yeah, and one of my favorite episodes was the infamous debate between yourself and Kevin Kelly.
That was fun. That was a lot of fun.
Do you have any memories of that?
Oh yeah, I think about that often. It came at a time when WCW was obviously doing a lot better than it ultimately did a couple of years later, but
Right.
WWF was doing some crazy stuff, and they were taking a lot of chances, and I was solidly in one thought process, and Kevin represented the total opposite approach. And so we decided, Jeremy invited us both to be on the show, and it turned into pretty much a memorable event for anybody to listen to it.
Has your perspective from that time changed since now?
Somewhat, because things change, things evolve, and I get asked this all the time because at the time I was arguing that the WWF should not be doing some of the things they were doing. I still believe at the time they shouldn't have.
Right.
But you have to put things into perspective. The argument I was making at that time was that here was a company that was heavily marketing their product towards young children. Their pay-per-views were sponsored by Milton Bradley. They were selling toys everywhere for kids, and at the same time they had positioned themselves for like 10 or 12 years as being family entertainment, as being the equivalent to Ringling Brothers. It was a circus, and it was heavily targeted at a young audience. Now that's different than it had been in the 60s, because traditionally in the old days you were looking at more of an adult audience, and kids were almost never brought into the wrestling shows. The young kids weren't anyway. So the WWF in the 80s became this big family business. And at the same time, while they were doing that, they immediately and abruptly changed philosophy and started doing some pretty outrageous stuff. I don't mind outrageous stuff. I just had a problem at the time with some of the things they were doing and with the audience that they were targeting themselves towards. And that was my big complaint. And everyone tends to forget that that was part of my thought process, because even today they bring up a column I wrote 4 or 5 years ago, and the argument.
They're always pouring out loud.
Yeah, and if you go back and read it,
right,
and read the things I was saying and talking about at the time, my problem wasn't what they did, so much as it was that they were doing it while heavily concentrating on going after a preteen type of an audience. So yeah, things change, and they've it's 4 or 5 years later now, and the audience today knows what they're watching. They know that the WWF is going to be a little bit risque. It's going to be a little bit cutting edge, a little overboard, and that's why I haven't written too many columns lately criticizing what they've done, because my argument has been taken away from me. Because by now, if a parent doesn't know what's going to be on a WWF program, shame on them. Back then, it was close enough to the time when the whole company was targeting kids, and having things like Doink the Clown and superhero kind of characters.
Right.
To go from that to go towards the sexual chocolate bondage footage was just, I think, a pretty big jump. So that's the problem I had with it. And sure, they've done some crazy stuff lately. The Katie Big stuff, was just, I think, in poor taste.
Right.
I don't have a problem with them doing that kind of stuff so much, because it's a different world we live in. It's a different world that they've positioned themselves in, and people should know and should expect that they're going to see those kind of things.
And I think the downturn in the ratings kind of reflects that as well.
Well, it does, but I think that the downturn in the ratings, and a lot of people have different thoughts on this. I think perhaps we're seeing what the wrestling audience really was all along. We were looking at ratings combined between Nitro and Raw that were up around 9.5 and 10 some weeks.
Right.
And I don't know how much of that audience was real, because so many people would watch those shows with a remote control in their hand. They go back and forth. I think it's not out of the question that some of those numbers were duplicated, and that nobody really knows how many people were watching at those times.
Just to go back a little bit in time, but we were talking about wrestling radio, and then you mentioned Jeremy Borash. How eventually did he become a part of WCW Live, and when it kicked off?
I had already been pretty much solidly behind the scenes working on things with WCW, and then asked me for a concept and for ways to improve their website, and I said, well, one thing I've thought about doing and think would be a good idea would be to have a nightly show that would be dedicated to fans calling in, asking questions, interviews with special guests, things like that, and I've got a guy that I've met that I think would be perfect for it. And basically we brought Jeremy on board, we did it. At first WCW was very hesitant to do it because they didn't think that the wrestlers would want to spend the time to do the show, to do the guest spots. And we never, from the first day we launched, had any problem at all. Hulk Hogan involved.
That was actually my first question.
He was our first guest.
Right.
And you know, we never ever had a problem. We had practically anybody that ever came through WCW came on our show, and you know, never once had a problem. But Jeremy came on board because, you know, I set it up, and it was my idea to have the show, and I knew that he could do it. He's one of the most talented guys you'd ever want to be around, and he did a great job hosting the show. He was the glue of the show. I was pretty much the boring kind of analyst guy that would come on and give his historical comments. But Jeremy was the glue to hold that show together.
I remember in the spring, early spring, maybe late winter of 2000, sometimes it sounded like the guys, I guess because of the backstage politics that were going on, sometimes it sounded like you guys were not having as much fun as you used to on the show. Is that true?
We had a blast for the first year. It got very difficult because we were in a situation where we were thrown out, and we were in many cases the only contact, well, in most cases we were the only contact that fans really had with the company, and the product was not what it should have been. It was a disappointment to everybody involved, I think. And when the ratings started going down, we were put in a position where we had to defend the product. We had to pretty much put our necks on the line and support the company because we were company, you know, paid spokespeople.
Right.
Wasn't terribly fair to us, and certainly rightfully a lot of people criticized us for doing that. But put yourself in our situation. What could you do? What could we have done differently? There were times in that first year that we did the show that we were openly critical, but that was because we were told we could be. Eric Bischoff, one of the initial promises that I wanted to give WCW management was that we'd be able to go on that show and do and say anything we wanted to, you know, within reason, but that we could be critical and we could say things about the product. Well, when Bill Bush came in,
right,
and he took over, you know, he was so paranoid and so in over his head and so clueless and inept that he saw us as a potential thorn in his side and basically put handcuffs on us, wouldn't let us say or do very much at all. So a lot of times we were doing that show, and if you listen very carefully, you could tell. Obviously, you could tell that we weren't quite as happy the second and third year that you know, we did the show as we were the first. So and that went for pretty much anybody in the company. Those were some really, really tough times. We had some ups and downs. We had some moments when it looked like we had a light at the end of the tunnel, but it just never ever seemed to turn itself around.
One of the times you got yourself on TV was with Tank Abbott.
Yep.
Do you have any memories of that?
Yeah, that was an interesting show. We were
You were doing the simulcast on the internet.
2 or 3 weeks into the time when Eric and Vince Russo came back, and probably was late April of that year.
Right.
I got a phone call. The show was in New York, I think Rochester. I got a phone call on Thursday telling me I needed to go take a physical because the show was going to be in New York that week and everybody had to have physicals. And I said, well, no, there's been a mistake. I'm behind-the-scenes internet guy. I don't get in the ring. I don't have anything to do with that part of the show, so I don't really need to have a physical. They said, no, we show you on the lineup for that week. And this was a couple of weeks after they had done the thing with Mark Madden where Tank attacked him, so I knew immediately what they were going to do.
Oh, boy.
Wasn't real thrilled about doing it because I've never really wanted to be a high-profile, in front of the camera kind of guy. I just am comfortable being behind the scenes, but you know, I was asked to do it and went along with it. When we got to the building that day, we went through the stuff we were going to do, and we were supposed to do a quick run-through where he was going to show us what he was going to do exactly. But they were doing something else that night that prevented us from getting in the ring and playing around doing what we were going to do, and he said, look, just go where I put you. And I said, all right. So we were doing the simulcast at ringside. He came over, grabbed me by the ears, pulled me over the desk, threw me on the ground, picked me up, rammed me into the side of the ring, and rolled me in and then punched me. By this time, Jeremy comes in, jumps on his back, and then Bill Banks came in, and you know, it was over in probably 45 seconds. I didn't realize it at the time, But Tank, when he got back through the back, he looked at me and said, "Nobody has ever hurt me so bad as you just did." And I said, "What do you mean?" And apparently when he had rammed me against the side of the ring apron, just instinctively my knee came up and it caught him right between the legs and almost dropped, and we'd had a headline internet guy takes out Tank Abbott. Somehow he was able to continue, but it was fun. I enjoyed it. It was something I didn't want to do, but I did it. Once we did it, it was a lot of fun, and people still ask me about it today.
During the demise of WCW, before it was purchased by Vince, how drastically downhill did the locker room morale go compared to when you started? And how did it compare to how it is in TNA now?
There's no comparison at any point with how TNA is. TNA is the most relaxed, most casual, most everybody likes each other. There's no glass ceiling. Nobody has a main event spot that thinks that that they have it locked up. Everybody is mixed in very well with everyone else. So this locker room at TNA is the best I've ever been around. WCW, even in the good days, there was a paranoia in the locker room because certain people got certain status that others didn't. You would have, some of the top guys would get a limousine. They would get, a hotel room on the presidential floor. They would get a private dressing room. They would get a lot of things that nobody else would get. And it ended up kind of creating a real strong division in that locker room, even in the good days. There were always people that felt like they were better than everybody else, and I think that was destructive and had a lot to do with the fact that things ended up not working out as well as they should have. Toward the end, everyone had been lied to and misled and abused so much that I think the whole company, several months before it ended, had pretty much given up. We had so many promises, and Brad Siegel, who just this week apparently has been shoved out of his position, thank goodness.
I agree with you.
Lied to so many people so many times that it astounds me that the man had any longevity at all after WCW went under. This man was a pathological liar, and was probably as incompetent an executive as anybody that you'd ever hope to be involved with. So most people, by the end, had heard enough, had learned not to believe anything that came out of that man's mouth, and going up all the way to the very last day of the company, he was still telling lies. So, that I think was a very difficult situation for everyone to deal with, but, there's no comparison with the locker room at WCW and NWA.
Did the lies that you speak of, did that lead up to confusion on who exactly was buying the company in the last, week or two?
Well, it led to a lot of things. The lies were, started at the very beginning when he said that, he was going to come in and keep regular office hours at the WCW office, and then he disappeared for 3 months. The biggest problem was there was no control, and he would not delegate or appoint anyone to head the company. That company, for the last year of its existence, didn't have anybody in charge. And you can say what you want about Eric Bischoff, but when Eric Bischoff was the president of WCW, you knew who was in charge. He might not make all the right decisions, but you could at least go to him and get an answer. With Brad Siegel, you number one, couldn't find him, and if you could find him, you could count on him telling you what he thought you wanted to hear. And then going around and doing something totally different. Toward the end, there was obviously a lot of confusion, and we had reason to believe, obviously because they issued a press release, that Eric Bischoff's group, Fusion, was going to end up buying the company. And for whatever reason, and there's a lot of people that believe that this was not entirely on the up and up, it became impossible for them to buy because the programs got canceled. So it's something that if you were involved in it at that time and you were behind the scenes, you understand a lot of the things that went on and that really haven't been talked about that much. But to think that company that at one point a couple of years earlier was valued just in the millions and millions and millions of dollars, was sold for almost nothing.
Right.
To the point where there's probably 50 people in the country that would have written a check for it if they knew they could get it for $2 or $3 million. That they basically stole it, and it was allowed to happen because people like Brad Siegel, for whatever reason, wanted it to happen.
Larry Zbyszko said that he wants to write a book about the demise of WCW. He said you can get a best-selling book out of it.
Oh, you absolutely could, and I may write one myself one day. So many things happened, and it would make an excellent movie of the week.
Right, that's what he said.
It's just, it's impossible in an interview like this to really go over everything that happened, but you could write a book about probably the last 2 weeks of the company.
Right. I was there. I was the biggest WCW fan in the world, so I went through, like when you guys went through the hell, I went through it with you, so I knew exactly what was going through.
Well, we had a lot of people like you, and thank goodness, the last show we did of WCW Live, and we were the last official broadcast of any kind WCW did.
I remember.
It was like flipping the switch on a company, and it was not a very happy experience, but we got through it, and we had such tremendous support from fans. We got calls literally from all over the world that night, and it helped us make it through, but it was not a fun experience. We kind of struggled through it.
Were you involved at all in the WWA?
No.
Not at all?
Other than I did handle their travel for many of their tours, but was not involved in any official capacity.
Where did the idea for NWA TNA come about?
It was something that I had kind of kicked around in the back of my mind for several months, and actually suggested to Eric Bischoff at one point when he was trying to put together something involving WCW. And basically what happened is shortly after WCW shut down, Jerry Jarrett, Jeff Jarrett, and Jeff's younger brother, Jason, went fishing with me on a charter fishing boat that I owned down in Louisiana. We went out in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico and brainstormed all day, and explained what my concept was and how I thought we could do certain things. And Jeff and Jerry immediately, latched onto the idea and started making changes and coming up with different approaches we could take. But basically, it was an idea that was really kind of hatched out in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico.
What's your official role in TNA? The
official title is Director of Administration and Talent Relations, which means that I'm pretty much in charge of all of the business aspects of the company. Handle all of the talent contracts, travel, basically anything to do with talent. So I'm doing the Jim Ross role for this company, as well as doing kind of a chief operating officer type role. Do a lot of behind the scenes stuff. Work on pretty much any business deal that comes through at some point ends up crossing my desk. And it's been fun. It's been the most challenging job that I've ever been in. It's one that has long hours. We work all day, every day, and Jeremy Borash in particular is just amazing. I mean, he was up here, just to give you an example, for this week's show. I think he had 3 video packages that he had to do. The one for D'Lo Brown, the one for Harrison Storm, a tag team recap, and I think maybe a history of the last several weeks he did. But those don't just get done by themselves, and the WWF might have, or the WWE might have 10 or 15 people available to do the kind of thing that Jeremy did Monday and Tuesday this week. He put all those packages together himself, by himself, with no help, and stayed up literally around the clock to do it. So we're all working hard. He's right now today, after almost no sleep, he's editing the weekend show, the Explosion show. So you see people like Jeremy on TV doing the ring announcing, and you think, hey, he's got a great gig, and it is fun, and it's something he's enjoying doing, but he's working probably harder than he's ever worked in his life, and so are the rest of us. It's been an incredible challenge.
Since you mentioned the Explosion show, I just saw on your website that you're expanding to Time Warner Cable. Is there any chance that you guys are going to get on more systems?
Yeah, we're adding every week. We just added Time Warner.
Which is New York, for those who don't know.
New York. We're talking to other Time Warner systems. If you're in New York, you can watch it on channel, I think 94,
right.
Which is the local kind of preview channel. But it's on every Tuesday night at 8 o'clock. We're talking to other Time Warner systems about doing the same thing. We're on the Urban America Network, which is a syndication that goes across the country to some of the smaller stations. So just check your local listings, and in the next week or so, we probably will have a complete listing of all of the stations that carry the show, and it'll be on our website.
Excellent.
You've expanded to several foreign countries, such as Asia, I think. And is there any chance of moving to my neck of the woods, UK?
We get so many emails from the UK. It's encouraging that many people are wanting to see us, and we're hoping that we can be there very soon. We do have someone that's in charge of international syndication for us, and We are currently working on finalizing another deal for Australia, something for New Zealand, something for Indonesia. We're currently on Star Asia, which covers most of the Asian continent and on into the Middle East. We are talking to someone in the UK that we hope to have something finalized soon. Not completed yet, but hopefully very soon. So we're just, we're working around the clock trying to make it happen, and hopefully we'll be there very soon.
Did the Jay Hausman somewhat sabotage incident affect the company in a bad way?
It did, and I'd rather not get into details on that because it is a matter of
legal issue.
Legal issues. But anytime you have setbacks, and that whole ordeal was a setback, it makes it difficult. We scrambled. We had a lot of things happen last summer that were difficult for us. We had to deal with the challenges of starting up a company. It's always difficult to do that. When you start from scratch, we had a lot of things that we didn't anticipate and that we probably should have. But we made it through. Most people didn't think we'd last 2 or 3 months.
Right.
We're in the process now of renewing our agreement with In Demand. Most people have written us off several times, but we're not going anywhere. We're well funded. We have a business plan in place that we think is working. We're getting better every week. The shows have been tremendous the last few weeks, and thanks to people like you helping us get the word out, more and more people are finding out about us and tuning in.
It's our pleasure to do so. The only other question I have for you is, this week I tried to order the pay-per-view, and I did, but my pay-per-view company claimed that the price is now $29.95.
That's a local mistake. We have not caught up on the price. What happens is some of the cable systems, in the process of keying in the prices, they just make mistakes. They look at it and it's wrestling, and they think, hey, it's an expensive event. That $9.95 must be a mistake. You can't give a wrestling show that cheap. So that's a mistake they've made. And if you contact your local cable system and tell them to contact In Demand's suggested retail price is $9.95.
Excellent, because that concerned me quite a bit last night, but I ordered it anyway. The only other
an extra $10 an hour out of you.
Right. The next question I have for you is there any chance of seeing a TNA live show, audio, like WCW Live was?
We talked as recently as Monday about doing something like that. It quite honestly, although we loved doing WCW Live, it was something that was very stressful, very time-consuming, and took away a lot of our life for those 2.5, 3 years. I would not rule it out. I think we may do something similar to that, but not every night.
Maybe like a Bite This type thing?
Maybe a once a week kind of a thing, and hopefully we can work out something to do it. I would love to do it because it was a great way to communicate with people, and we got instant feedback, and that's so very important. To hear from fans right after something happens, you get a genuine reaction from them because they haven't had time to be influenced by something someone else has written or said. And too many times people decide whether they like something
based on what other journalists say.
Someone else might write about it.
Right.
So the WCW Live experiment was a very good one for us because we could hear immediately from the people that were our most loyal fans, and it's something we'd like to try to do if we can. We're going to look to see how we can do it, and try to find a few hours a week that we might be able to devote to it.
A couple of questions about contracts, because you mentioned that you've handled the contracts. First of all, an incident a couple of weeks back involving Jimmy Yang. It was reported around most of the sites that there was an incident backstage because he wouldn't sign the regular one-night contract deal. It's been rumoured that possibly the same sort of situation as they might try in the future with other people, sort of word in the ear from another organisation or something along those lines. Is that any truth, or is that complete rubbish?
Well, you never know. I mean, it's something that surprised us when it happened with Jimmy because he had signed a contract before that was a multi-show deal that was much more restrictive than the one that he refused to sign this time. That particular contract had expired, and that's the reason that we had to sign him to a new deal, and it was a one night because he was not a regular part of our roster at the time. He was doing quite a bit of work in Japan, and basically we had called him at the last minute to come in for this show because someone else we had in mind wasn't available. We called him, he drove in, we asked him to sign a one-page agreement, and for whatever reason, and I don't know the reason because he didn't say, he just refused to sign. I've seen rumored that the reason was because we had a no-compete clause in there. I've seen rumors that he had to sign his name over to us. None of that's true. It was simply a very standard one-page agreement saying, we're going to use you on our pay-per-view tonight, and you give us the permission to do that. Very, very simple, very standard, no trick clauses, no compete. It just boggles my mind why he would have had a problem signing it, but he did, and we'll live and learn. We don't have, I don't think, a problem with anybody on our roster right now. We've got practically everyone that we want to have signed to a long-term deal. We do have signed to a long-term deal.
Who have you got signed mainly to most of the long-term deals?
Gosh, I mean, there's so many. Just off the top of my head, we've got AJ Styles, Jerry Lynn, Chris Harris, James Storm, obviously Jeff Jarrett. We've got Conan, Kid Cash, and Trinity. I mean, we've got our core group is signed to long-term deals. Anyone else that's on the show is signed to some sort of contract ranging from one night to maybe 6 months. So it depends on what we're doing, what we can afford, what makes sense for everyone involved. But we're not in a position at this point where any of our core talent that we mean to use long term would be able to be signed out from under us anytime soon.
Right. I was listening to an appearance you made on another radio show a few weeks back, and they brought up such talents as Just Incredible and Mike Awesome and such. And I mean, I know that I think you brought up people such as Sean Stasiak who can't work during the middle of the week because of their commitments. You say that you've got most people under contract for a long term that you would want. Are there any one-night kind of deals such as Mike Awesome? Or, I mean, if you could work around, say, Sean Stasiak or any other people that you'd like to bring in?
We would never rule out working with anyone. You know, we one of the things that we've enjoyed doing in recent weeks is kind of springing a surprise almost every week. This week it was D'Lo Brown, it was
Hacksaw Jim Duggan.
We had a lot on this show that has fit the surprise theme that we've had in recent weeks. Some of those people, like Hacksaw, we do sign to maybe a 1 or 2 show deal. Others, D'Lo, we have signed to a longer deal and are working on a long-term deal. I thought D'Lo did a tremendous job and had a tremendous impact. Just Incredible, we had a discussion with. He had some conflicts and was not available at this time. In the future, if he does become available, we may talk to him again. Mike Awesome, don't believe we have talked to, at least not at my level. He's working a lot in Japan, I believe, and is somebody that is definitely the kind of guy we'd like to take a look at. But at this time, we are looking at other things. One of the problems we have is we're only a 2-hour show, actually about 1 hour and 50 minutes, and even though we don't have commercials, that's still not a lot of time, and we only have so many spots available. So, we could probably sign 10 or 12 people that would be capable of being on the show, but do we tell an AJ Styles or a Jerry Lynn or a Harrison Storm or some of our guys that have been with us from the beginning, hey guys, we're going to have to leave you off for a month or so because we've got to put somebody else on the show. It's very difficult when all you have is the 1 hour and 50 minutes each week to maintain a core group. We don't want to get in a situation like WCW where we have 150 people under contract or that we have a roster that's deeper than we really need. And it might mean that we'll miss out on some people. It might mean that some of the people that we might normally want to keep might end up going to other situations, Japan, maybe even the WWE again. But we're trying to do it right. We're trying to be smart. We're trying not to overextend ourselves. We're not giving anybody crazy money. We're not certainly making the WCW kind of mistakes. But we're just trying to look at each situation on its own merits and see what makes sense for everyone involved.
Final question I have about contracts is when you first started out, there was reports that you'd signed people like Ken Shamrock to a long-term deal. But in the case of Shamrock, he never returned. Was there any truth to the fact that there was a long-term deal with Ken? Or?
We had a long-term option on him, which his contract was slightly different than a standard deal. And the option was to use him for up to a certain number of shows. We chose at the time that we chose to take the belt off of him to go different directions. And he has since gone different directions and has done some more of the fighting kind of stuff. And I'm not real sure if we'll do anything else with him. We certainly wouldn't rule that out. But at this point, he's not on our immediate board for doing anything in the near future.
The next thing we're going to do is word associations, where I'll say a name and you tell me. It could be a one-word answer, or you can go on a rant if you want to, whatever comes to your mind. Okay. Paul Heyman.
Most people would say genius. I would tend to agree. I think he's got his flaws. Obviously, he's not a great businessman, or he'd still be in business at ECW. But he's a guy that is as creative as anybody that I've ever been around.
Vince McMahon.
Vince McMahon, aggressive. He made the ruthless aggression speech on Raw a few months ago, and I think ruthless aggression pretty much sums him up. That's not necessarily a bad thing. He's the most successful wrestling promoter in the history of the business, and he's done a lot of good things to help the business, and at the same time he's done probably a good bit of bad things to hurt the business. So overall, I would say ruthless aggression is the best way to describe Vince McMahon.
Eric Bischoff.
Eric Bischoff doesn't get the credit he deserves. He changed the wrestling industry. He probably saved the WWF when he launched Nitro, because they were only getting ratings in the low twos and were stagnant and content to be at the stage of business they were at the time. And when he launched Nitro, against all advice from anybody in the wrestling business, he literally changed the way the industry operated and made a lot of people a lot of money. Is the only man to ever really beat Vince McMahon, and he did beat Vince McMahon for about 2 years. So I think that he deserves a lot more credit than he's been given. He's someone I'm happy to say is a friend, and I wish him nothing but the best.
Ric Flair.
Ric Flair's a legend. He's the greatest wrestler ever to live, and probably the most fun person to be around. He's Ric Flair literally 24 hours a day. You can go into a restaurant with him, and all heads turn when he walks in. He is Ric Flair all day and all night.
Hulk Hogan.
Hulk Hogan, another guy that doesn't get the credit he deserves. Forget whether he's a great technical wrestler or not. He, along with Roddy Piper, who doesn't get very much credit either for this, basically launched a new industry. They were responsible for the pay-per-view industry really taking off. They propelled wrestling into new levels in the 80s, and Hulk Hogan, for the length of time that he's been a main eventer or a top-tier talent, has probably made more money in the wrestling business than anybody else in history.
Goldberg.
Overrated. Not generally a very nice person. Although I will say that I've never seen anybody that will go as out of his way as he does to go and spend time with kids, with people that may have illnesses. He genuinely believes in doing that, and I salute him for it. We didn't get along that well in WCW. I had some pretty strong and maybe some unfair things to say at the time about him. But he took advantage of a situation. He was handed a lot that maybe he didn't deserve at the time. He was given an opportunity, and he made the best of it. But I don't think his history is over. He's gonna have to do a lot more in the wrestling business to be called a great wrestler. Don't know if that matters to him, and it may not. But best thing I can say about him is that he is genuinely one of the people that takes his responsibility outside of the ring very seriously when it comes to dealing with kids and people that have illnesses.
Jim Ross.
Jim Ross, at one time probably the greatest announcer. Really, in the last couple of years, I think he has slipped considerably. I think he, and many times, becomes almost a parody of himself. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just he's capable of so much better than he's done in the last year. I think that I've got a newfound respect for what he does behind the scenes because of what I'm doing with TNA. It's not a very easy thing. But Jim Ross, I think, is going to go down as one of the great announcers ever.
Vampiro?
Loose cannon, someone easily influenced, someone who, for some reason, has a grudge against me and has never spoken to me directly about it. don't really know what his problem is, but had some charisma. Didn't do what he should have with the charisma, and the fact that he's not working in the mainstream of wrestling today is probably his fault more than anybody else's. If he wants to be involved with TNA, he's got my phone number, but I haven't heard from him.
Dave Meltzer.
Dave Meltzer was a pioneer. He was a guy that that was in the right place at the right time, took advantage of being in that place at that time, and became a success. He's the most successful newsletter publisher in the wrestling history. So a lot of people think we hate each other. We don't. I talk to him every now and then. While I understand he's a competitor, and in some ways, got one wrestling, and we try to reach somewhat of the same audience. But he's a guy that I think sometimes is a little bit too sarcastic, a little bit too critical, and a little bit takes himself a little bit too seriously. But overall, I think he's got the best of intentions and tries to do as good a job as he can, and being fair and honest.
Can I just jump in with one here? You have to answer it if you don't want to. Matt Boone.
I'm sorry?
Matt Boone.
Don't, I see that name all the time. I know that he runs one of the smaller, well, not smaller, and I don't mean that in a way to put him down, but one of the other wrestling websites. Couldn't off the top of my head tell you which one it is, but for whatever reason, a lot of people seem to have heat with him. I don't really have anything one way or the other, because I haven't had very much in the way of contact with him.
Jerry Jarrett.
A genius. I've known Jerry for quite some time. Did not know just how smart he was until I had a chance to work closely with him. His brilliance is best seen up close. If you have a chance to work close to him and see how he puts a show together, it's not just the ideas, it's the way he converts those ideas to paper and to put a show into an order that makes sense. He knows how to get his points across in storyline fashion, and probably one of the greatest promoters and writers of a television product ever.
Jerry Lynn.
Jerry Lynn is a guy that probably a lot of people would agree was one of our most valuable players last year at TNA. He has been around a long time and has not really gotten the opportunity in many places that we've given him here. We've put him into the mainstream mix with our company, and we've given him the opportunity to go out and show what he can do. He's I think one of the best things we've got going for us.
Trinity.
Trinity's got huge potential. Huge potential. She's a lot of people might not know she is a professional stunt woman, and has done some stuff for movies as recently as Daredevil. So she's somebody that comes to wrestling already with quite a background, with the ability to do crazy stuff, and she's got a very good sense of timing, and a very good sense of what you need to do at particular points in a wrestling match. I think she and Kit Cash have excellent chemistry together, and she's going to be a major star.
Vince Russo.
Somebody I've had my differences with. Certainly had different philosophy than he did back in the WWF days. Was able to work with him fairly closely in WCW, certainly closely here in TNA. Gets criticized more than he should, and is blamed for a lot of things that he had no control over. I think with Vince Russo, it would be probably wise to throw out everything that he did in WCW, because most people don't realize just what he was up against. What everybody was up against the last year and a half to 2 years that WCW was around. You could have pick any promoter, any writer that you want to, and put them in that spot, they would have failed. It was impossible at that time for anybody to come in and do anything with the structure that we had at WCW that would have been a success. So Vince Russo, you need to look at the success he had in WWF. Whether you agree with the way he did it or not, he succeeded. He has not really been involved with TNA, I don't think, long enough to make an impact, but he's brought quite a bit to the table. His style of Crash TV is one that is appealing to people with short attention spans. And I think that what he needed more than anything was to come into contact with someone like Jerry Jarrett that could explain, yes, that's good, but this works too. And you have to have a little bit of both. So you're seeing some of the Vince Russo influence, but you're not seeing Vince Russo unleashed. I think that's probably the best thing for Vince and for everyone else.
What is the future you see for TNA?
I see a future where we continue to work hard to try to make sure that as many people know about us as possible. We try to expand our audience. We try to get a regular time slot on free TV so that we can have the product in front of as many people as possible, and they can learn about us and know what to expect on Wednesday night. I think the future's bright. We've got a lot of good people. We've got a great locker room. We have good staff in place working as hard as they possibly can. We've got Jeff Jarrett, who is one of the hardest working people I've ever been around, and a genuinely great person who I'd like to be friends with outside of the wrestling business, even if I didn't know him in the wrestling business. He's a genuinely good guy. Jerry Jarrett, Vince Russo, everybody involved is working around the clock to make this thing a success, and I think we're going to make it.
One question about last night's show. You spoke earlier about Raw is Porn, that column that you wrote, and then last night you had that incident with the Lollipop. How much of that was scripted?
Well, things happen, and whether it was scripted or not, it happened. A lot of people are critical, and a lot of people have emailed me pointing out the hypocrisy of the fact that I wrote Raw as Porn.
Right.
Although they didn't point out it was 4 or 5 years ago.
Right.
I'm not going to try to justify it. I would prefer it had not happened,
Right.
but it's not something that I really have control over one way or the other. I don't have such a problem that it did happen because we're not the WWF. We're not on free TV. We're on a pay-per-view that's rated TV 14. We are not out there marketing primarily towards a young audience. So, yeah, there were kids in the crowd, and I'd prefer that the kids in the crowd not have seen it, but they did. They didn't turn to stone. They're not going to immediately become perverts. It was about 3 seconds, and it was over. Will it happen again? Who knows? I don't think so, but you never know.
How do you answer your critics? This is the last question. How do you answer your critics that call you a shill, or that your views are jaded towards TNA or George WCW?
Well, guilty. What's the big deal? I've never hidden what I've done. I've never pretended to be something that I'm not. I think it's general knowledge that, how could I have hidden the fact that I was with WCW, being on WCW Live every night? It was not a secret. It's not like I went into a phone booth and turned into some other person. I was pro WCW. I grew up in the South. I grew up in an NWA territory. I grew up watching and loving that kind of wrestling. It's just like if you have some people that are New York Yankees fans and they're going to hate the Mets. I tended to grow up in a time when the WWF, to our part of the country where I lived, was the evil empire.
Right.
They were the people that were stealing the stars, like the Junkyard Dog and Hacksaw Jim Duggan and Ted DiBiase and all those guys. So, I had some built-in loyalty to WCW and to the NWA, and it evolved to the point where I had a chance to work for them. So, having already come to the table with the philosophy and the background of liking that style, it didn't take a brain surgeon to think that I was going to continue to like that style when I worked for him.
Mm-hmm.
So I never claimed to be anything that I wasn't. I never claimed to be Walter Cronkite. I never claimed to be a journalist. Other people will put those labels on you. One Wrestling is not the New York Times. If you come to One Wrestling and you expect to see the New York Times, well, I'm sorry. That's not what it is. I think we do a good job on One Wrestling of giving a variety of viewpoints, and I do not, no matter what anybody might think, tell anybody on that staff what to write or how to write it. Don't censor anybody. We've had some very critical columns written on One Wrestling about TNA. And if you look, I have not written, I don't believe, and if I have maybe once, I haven't written anything about TNA since we started. I've written only maybe 1 or 2 columns that had anything negative to say in the last year about the WWF. One of them was about the Tough Enough, and in fact that was the last column I wrote, was about the Tough Enough situation where Bob Holly beat the hell out of the kid on Tough Enough.
Right.
Well, I just didn't like that. I thought it was Bush League. I thought he was out of line, and that has nothing to do with me being with TNA. It has nothing to do with him working for WWF. It could have been a basketball camp that the kid was in, and if one of the trainers had beaten him up, I'd have felt the same way. So, it's popular to call Bob Ryder names and to make fun of him and put goofy pictures up and to say he's a shill. I don't care. I used to let it bother me. I used to stay up all night. It would bother me to the point where I would just not be able to sleep because I couldn't understand why people would have such hatred for him. But, I don't let it bother me anymore. I have moved on. I'm content knowing that, you know, some people are going to like me, some people aren't going to like me, and something I just have to live with. Can't make somebody think, you know, something that they don't want to think. But I just ask the people that aren't as critical as they are of me to try to step back for a minute, put yourself in my shoes, and see if you do anything differently.
Excellent. Bob, this has been an awesome interview. It's far surpassed anything I would have expected. I think Dan would agree.
It's been a pleasure speaking to you.
I've enjoyed it, and wish you guys the best of luck.
I have one last question to ask you. This is for WCW Live Faithful.
Where's James from Kentucky?
You stole it.
Exactly.
That was going to be, actually it was going to be, was it a work or shoot?
Oh yeah, absolute shoot. And I still don't know what the story is with the guy. He called one night, and it was, you know, if you listen to the old wrestling radio show, I mean, you know that every now and then we'll just latch onto something.
Right.
We did the Fat Whacker commercial on wrestling radio.
Right.
That became kind of a theme. And James called one night, and he just had the voice, and he had the, I don't know, mannerisms that, you know, he kind of clicked with us. So we started, you know, bringing him into the show kind of. And when he would call, we would make his calls special, and we'd you know, start asking him, you know, well, you work for a chicken factory. What do you do there? Oh, I pluck the chickens. Oh, you're a chicken plucker. So it was, I don't think that, you know, it turned into something that, you know, maybe it didn't initially need to be turned into. But we kind of made him a star, and he believed it and lived it, and he still to this day is one of Jeff Jarrett's favorite things about WCW. He asks me all the time about James from Kentucky.
I bet you if you started the TNA Live, he'd be like your first caller.
He'd be one of them. Yeah, we had so many great callers. We had the kid from New Orleans. It was on one of our last shows, Pound Cake.
Right.
Who had been in character, and he, you know, the callers, we never really set up very many callers at all. This guy just called and had goofy
things to say.
And a strange sounding voice.
Right.
And, you know, that was something that he wanted to be. Well, the last night, here's a guy that's called us for a year and a half, and was, you know, coming off as a lunatic.
Right.
He called the last night, and as normal sounding a voice as you could think of, and was emotional and had a very special message for us, and it meant a lot to us. But, you know, we had so many great callers, and James was probably everybody's favorite. Well, some people might not like him, but, you know, I still remember the night that he called and said that, you know, he's been working us, he's really an accountant. Well,
right.
You know, just crazy stuff. You know, we used to, and some of those times it got pretty tough to talk about WCW because it was so bad.
Right.
You had to rely on the callers for the entertainment, and we had some great callers.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. It was an honor to speak with you, and
I appreciate it. The honor is all mine. If any of your listeners have not checked out NWA TNA, please do it. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. You know, give us a shot. It's only $9.95 every Wednesday night, 8 o'clock Eastern on In Demand and DirecTV. And guys, I wish you guys all the best of luck. Hope your show's a great success. I know how much fun it is doing this because I did it for a couple years with Jeremy, and I know that you're going to do really well with this.
thank you very much, and it's an honor. Stay tuned for more from the interactive interview.